The old university library smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. Thomas stood alone in the archives section, his fingers tracing the spines of books nobody had touched in years. 10 years ago, he had been one of the most respected archaeologists in the field. Now he couldn't even get his emails returned. "Closing in 15 minutes, called the librarian from somewhere beyond the tall shelves. Thomas nodded, though no one could see him. He hadn't found anything useful today, just like yesterday and the day before. His reputation was in shambles after the disaster in Egypt. He had been so certain he'd found evidence of an unknown dynasty, staking his career and the university's money on the dig. When they found nothing but natural rock formations, the academic world turned their backs on him. "Wishful thinking isn't science," the department head had said when firing him. As Thomas turned to leave, his elbow knocked against a metal filing cabinet, causing its poorly latched drawer to slide open. Inside were folders that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Something caught his eye. A folder marked Restricted Access, J. Wilson Expedition 1977. Wilson. The name triggered a memory. An eccentric explorer who had vanished in South America in the late 70s. The university had quietly distanced itself from him after his disappearance. Thomas glanced around. The librarian was nowhere in sight. He slipped the folder under his jacket and walked out, heart pounding as if he were a student stealing candy, rather than a 45-year-old man with 3 published books. Back in his small apartment, Thomas spread the contents across his kitchen table. Most were field notes, sketched maps, and photographs of jungle terrain. But beneath these ordinary items lay something extraordinary on pages of what appeared to be a translation of symbols unlike any Thomas had ever seen. Wilson's notes described finding ruins, deep in the Amazon that shouldn't exist. The civilization had no connection to known South American cultures. The notes became increasingly excited, then eerily frantic as Wilson described the central temple and something he called the Forever Light. The final pages contained Wilson's translation of stone tablets. "Those who drink from the spring of light shall walk beyond the shadow of death. The guardians sleep but do not die. They wait for worthy blood." Thomas stayed up all night reading. By morning, his apartment walls were covered with pages from the folder, connected by strings and his own scribbled notes. He had been searching for a way back into archaeology's good graces for years. This could be it. Wilson had never returned to claim his discovery. The location coordinates were vague, but Thomas could figure it out. He tried calling his former colleague at the university's anthropology department. "Look, I know we haven't talked since the incident," Thomas said when she finally answered, "but I found something important in Wilson's old files." "Wilson?" Her voice turned cold. "You need to leave that alone. Those files were restricted for a reason. But this civilization he found, he didn't find anything. He went crazy in the jungle and got his whole team killed. The university buried it to avoid scandal. Let it go, Thomas. Find another way to make a comeback." She hung up. Thomas stared at the phone, then back at Wilson's notes. The final entry read, "They don't believe me. I'm going back alone. The light calls to me." Over the next week, Thomas contacted everyone who might help fund an expedition. Former colleagues laughed at him. Grant committees rejected his applications without review. But Thomas couldn't let go. The images in Wilson's notes haunted his dreams. Strange symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Sketches of a temple with walls that glowed. He sold his car. Then his rare book collection. Then his grandmother's antique jewelry. It wasn't much, but enough to get him to South America and hire a few local guides who wouldn't ask too many questions. The night before his flight, Thomas received an anonymous email. "I worked with Wilson before he disappeared. Don't go looking for what he found. Some things are meant to stay hidden." Thomas deleted it without replying. He was beyond warnings now. He packed Wilson's notes carefully between the pages of his well-worn copy of Lost Civilizations of the Americas. His hands trembled with excitement rather than fear. He felt more alive than he had in years. The flight to Brazil was long. Thomas spent the hours reviewing satellite maps of the region where Wilson had disappeared. The area was still largely unexplored, covered in dense rainforest. Perfect for hiding an ancient secret. In a small river town at the edge of the Amazon, Thomas sought guides willing to venture into uncharted territory. Most refused when they heard the general location. "Bad place, Andy," said one older man, making a sign to ward off evil. "The forest spirits guard it." No one returns. Thomas finally found 4 men desperate enough for money to overcome their superstitions. 2 brothers who needed cash for their mother's medical treatment, a college student funding his education, and a weathered jungle tracker with a gambling debt. They gathered at a worn wooden table in a riverside bar, maps spread between them. Thomas was careful not to reveal too much. "We're looking for ruins," he explained, "possibly pre-Columbian. I have reason to believe they contain valuable artifacts." "What kind of valuable?" asked the tracker, eyes narrowing. "The kind that will get all of us into history books," Thomas replied, "and make us comfortable for life." "People talk about cursed places in that region," said the older brother. "Tribes that avoid certain areas. Strange noises at night," Thomas smiled. "Local legends often surround archaeological sites. It's how ancient people protected their treasures." The younger brother looked doubtful. "What happened to the last person who went looking for these ruins?" Thomas hesitated, then decided a partial truth was necessary. An explorer named Wilson reported finding something unusual in 1977. He wasn't specific about the location. He disappeared during his second expedition. The tracker whistled low. "Wilson? I heard stories about him when I was young. They say he came back changed after his first trip, talking nonsense about lights in the jungle and people who lived forever." "Superstition," Thomas said firmly. "He probably got lost or fell victim to disease. The jungle is dangerous enough without inventing curses." They spent hours planning routes and supply needs. As night fell, the men grew more comfortable with the idea, especially after Thomas paid half their fee up front. Only the tracker remained wary. As they finished their meeting, he pulled Thomas aside. "I've spent 40 years in this jungle. There are places even I won't go. If we find anything strange, anything that doesn't feel right, we turn back. Agreed?" Thomas nodded, though he had no intention of turning back. Not when he was so close to redemption. That night in his cheap hotel room, Thomas dreamt of a stone temple with walls that pulsed with blue light. In the dream, he walked toward a doorway that seemed to whisper his name. He woke before seeing what was inside, his heart racing and a strange taste like copper in his mouth. He attributed the dream to excitement and the unfamiliar sounds of the jungle night drifting through his open window. But as he packed his gear at dawn, he found himself humming a melody he'd never heard before. The expedition would leave at first light tomorrow. Thomas checked his supplies one last time. Equipment, medicines, Wilson's notes secured in a waterproof case. His hands shook slightly as he zipped his backpack. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "This time I'll prove them all wrong." Outside his window, the vast green expanse of the Amazon waited, hiding its secrets beneath a canopy that had kept them safe for centuries. Thomas didn't know it yet, but the jungle was already aware of his coming, and it had been waiting for someone just like him, someone desperate enough to ignore all warnings, someone who would finally awaken what should have remained asleep. The first 3 days in the jungle passed without incident. Thomas led the small group along narrow waterways, checking Wilson's old notes against landmarks when possible. The air grew thicker with each passing hour, heavy with moisture and the rich scent of decaying plants. At night, they strung hammocks between trees, taking turns on watch as unfamiliar creatures howled in the darkness. On the 4th morning, Thomas woke before the others. A fine mist hung between the trees, turning the world ghostly and silent. He pulled out Wilson's journal, tracing his finger over a sketch of 3 peaked hills. According to the notes, these hills marked the entrance to a valley where the ruins waited. "We're close," Thomas whispered to himself, excitement building in his chest. So close, talking to ghosts? The tracker appeared beside him, silent as a shadow. His name was Rivera, and despite his initial reluctance, he had proven invaluable, spotting dangers before anyone else. Thomas closed the journal. "Just reviewing our route." Rivera nodded toward the pages. "Those drawings, they match the weeping hills ahead. Bad place, even the local tribes avoid it. They say the ground swallows people there. Probably just sinkholes," Thomas said. "Natural formations. Nothing natural about that place." Rivera poured himself coffee from their small pot. "My grandfather went there as a young man. Said the trees whispered words no human mouth could make." Thomas might have laughed a week ago. Now he just nodded. The jungle had a way of making impossible things seem reasonable. By midday, the group reached a river wider than the previous waterways. The brothers Esteban and Luis expertly navigated their small boat through swirling currents. The college student, who asked them to call him Walker, sat near Thomas, peppering him with questions about archaeology and ancient civilizations. "So what exactly are we looking for?" Walker asked. "Gold statues?" "Knowledge," Thomas replied. "This civilization had technologies we can't even imagine. Wilson's notes suggest they knew secrets about extending human life." Walker raised an eyebrow. "Like immortality? That's a myth in every culture. Maybe there's truth behind those myths." The conversation died as they rounded a bend in the river. Before them rose 3 hills, their peaks shrouded in mist despite the afternoon sun. Even from a distance, Thomas could see why they were called the Weeping Hills. Water seeped from their sides, creating the illusion of tears streaming down faces. Rivera crossed himself. "We should camp here tonight. Bad luck to approach those hills in fading light," no one argued. As they set up camp, Thomas noticed a strange silence falling over the jungle. The usual chorus of birds and monkeys had disappeared, leaving only the soft patter of water dripping from leaves. That night, Thomas dreamed again of the blue-lit temple. This time he saw shadows moving within, beckoning him forward. He woke with a gasp, his body drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. Beside him, Walker was already awake, staring into the darkness. "You hear that?" Walker whispered. Thomas listened. At first he heard nothing. Then, barely perceptible beneath the night sounds, a rhythm like distant drums or perhaps a heartbeat. "Probably just water on rock," Thomas said, not believing his own words. "It's coming from the hills." Walker's voice trembled slightly, "And it's getting louder." By morning, no one mentioned the strange sounds, though dark circles under their eyes revealed none had slept well. They ate a quick breakfast before continuing toward the hills. The river narrowed, forcing them to abandon their boat and proceed on foot. The jungle changed as they approached the hills. The vegetation grew dense but oddly uniform, trees of the same height, vines that seemed to twist in identical patterns. Thomas noticed Rivera touching a knife charm hanging around his neck more frequently. "The vegetation shouldn't be this consistent," Walker said, voicing what Thomas was thinking. "It's almost like it was planted." "Focus on the path," Rivera snapped. "We need to find a way through before dark." They found a narrow trail between 2 of the hills late that afternoon. As they passed between the looming slopes, water dripped onto their shoulders and heads, unnaturally warm like tears or blood. That night, no one wanted to sleep. They built their fire larger than usual, the flames casting jumping shadows across their tense faces. Luis, the younger brother, broke the silence. "I keep hearing voices," he admitted. "When the wind blows, it sounds like words." "What words?" Thomas asked, leaning forward. Luis shook his head. "I don't know. Not Spanish or English, but I feel like I should understand them." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Wilson's notes mentioned similar experiences, unknown languages that seemed familiar, like memories from another life. Walker stood suddenly. "Something's watching us." They all turned to follow his gaze. Beyond the circle of firelight, 2 reflective points glowed briefly before disappearing. "Just an animal," Rivera said, "but he drew his machete." "We should leave," Esteban said, putting an arm around his brother. "This isn't worth the money." Thomas pulled out a stack of extra bills he'd been saving for emergencies. "Double pay if we continue for 3 more days. If we haven't found anything by then, we turn back." The brothers exchanged looks. Eventually, Esteban nodded. 3 days. Not 1 hour more. Only Walker seemed unbothered by the strange occurrences, his academic curiosity overriding his fear. If there really is an unknown civilization out here, it could change everything we know about human history. The next morning, Luis was gone. His hammock hung empty, the rope still firmly tied. His boots remained by the dying fire. "Luis!" Esteban shouted, his voice echoing between the hills. "Luis!" They searched for hours, finding nothing but a single footprint leading toward a dense wall of vegetation. The print was oddly shallow, as if Luis had been lifted rather than walking away. Rivera pulled Thomas aside while Esteban continued calling for his brother. "We go back now." "We can't leave him," Thomas argued. "He's already gone," Rivera said flatly. "The jungle took him." Thomas looked into Rivera's eyes and saw real fear. "1 more day," he pleaded. "If we find the ruins, maybe we'll find your brother too." Esteban overheard. "If anything happens to Luis because you wanted to chase fairy tales?" He left the threat unfinished, but Thomas understood. The expedition was falling apart. He needed to find something concrete, and soon, or they would all abandon him. That afternoon, they discovered the first sign that Wilson's notes were accurate. Partially buried in the soil was a stone block unlike any natural formation. Its surface bore symbols matching those in Wilson's journal. Thomas dropped to his knees beside it, brushing away dirt with trembling hands. "This is it," he whispered. "Proof." Walker crouched beside him, running his fingers over the strange markings. "These don't match any known writing system." Even Rivera seemed impressed. "How old is it?" "Impossible to tell without proper equipment," Thomas said. "But the lack of erosion suggests it was deliberately buried, preserved." They uncovered more stones as they continued, forming a pathway that led deeper into the valley between the hills. The symbols grew more complex, some seeming to shift when viewed from different angles. That night, no one suggested turning back, not even Esteban. The discovery had changed something fundamental in all of them. Thomas noticed they all touched the stones as they passed, as if drawn to them. They made camp near a particularly large stone formation. As darkness fell, Thomas noticed something he'd missed in daylight: the faintest blue glow emanating from lines between the stones. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing. They all saw it. The light pulsed slowly like breathing. "The forever light," Walker whispered, quoting Wilson's notes. Rivera stood abruptly. "I hear someone coming." They all fell silent, listening to the rustling undergrowth. A figure emerged from the darkness, walking with an odd, stiff gait. "Luis?" Esteban rushed forward, then stopped. "Luis, what happened to you?" The young man stood at the edge of their camp, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the stones. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the sound that emerged wasn't human. It rose and fell in patterns that made Thomas's head ache. "That's not your brother anymore," Rivera said, pulling Esteban back. Luis, or whatever was wearing his form, turned and walked back into the jungle. Without a word, Esteban followed. "Stop him!" Thomas yelled, but Rivera held him back. "Let him go. We have bigger problems." He pointed beyond their camp. In the darkness surrounding them, dozens of blue lights had appeared, moving closer in a tightening circle. The drums Thomas had heard in his dreams now pounded in his ears, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "We need to reach the center," Thomas said, gathering his most essential gear. "The temple. It's our only chance." Walker nodded, his face pale but determined. "The stones are leading us there." Rivera looked between them as if they were insane. "You want to go deeper? After what happened to Luis and Esteban?" "Something called them," Thomas said. "Something in those ruins. I need to know what." As the blue lights drew closer, Thomas made his choice. He would follow the stone path to its end. Whether it led to discovery or destruction, the obsession that had driven him into the jungle now burned too bright to ignore. The pulse of the stones matched his heartbeat as he stepped forward, drawn toward a truth that had waited centuries to be found. Thomas led the way along the stone path, his flashlight revealing more ancient blocks emerging from the earth with each step. The blue glow pulsed stronger here, flowing between the stones like liquid light. Behind him, Walker followed closely, his academic curiosity seemingly overriding his fear. Rivera brought up the rear, machete drawn, constantly looking over his shoulder at the dancing lights that kept pace with them through the trees. "They're hurting us," Rivera said, his voice tight. "Like cattle." Thomas didn't respond. The strange harmony between the light's movements and his own heartbeat made it hard to think. Each pulse sent waves of, not exactly sound, but something he felt in his bones, in the spaces between thoughts. Wilson's journal had described the sensation. The light speaks directly to the blood. The stone path widened as they walked deeper into the valley, eventually opening to a clearing unlike anything Thomas had seen in the jungle. Perfect circles of massive trees created 3 concentric rings, their branches woven together so tightly that even the heaviest rainfall would barely penetrate. Between the rings, stone paths spiraled inward like a giant maze. "This isn't natural," Walker whispered, reaching out to touch one of the trees. "These trees are hundreds of years old, but they've been deliberately grown this way." "Or something made them grow this way," Thomas said. At the center of the clearing stood a structure that made Thomas's breath catch. Not a temple as he had imagined, but a perfect dome of seamless stone half buried in the earth. No visible door, no windows, just smooth surface marred only by spiraling symbols that matched those from Wilson's notes. The dome pulsed with the same blue light, brighter now, like a heartbeat growing stronger. Wilson was here, Thomas said, spotting weathered equipment partially reclaimed by the jungle. A rusted tripod. The rotted remains of a canvas tent. Rivera backed away. I'm not going any closer. Whatever took Luis and Esteban is in there. We can't leave now, Thomas said, not taking his eyes off the dome. We've found it. The lost civilization. Lost for a reason, Rivera spat. You feel it, don't you? The wrongness. This place wasn't built by people. Thomas felt it, a pressure behind his eyes, a ringing in his ears that almost formed words. The symbols on the dome seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging into new patterns that somehow made sense. Walker walked slowly toward the dome, his hand outstretched. It's vibrating, like it's alive. A crack appeared where Walker's fingers touched the surface, spreading outward in fractal patterns. Blue light spilled through the widening fissures. The air filled with a high-pitched tone that made Thomas's teeth ache. Get back! Rivera shouted, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The crack split wider, revealing darkness beyond. Not the darkness of an unlit space, but something deeper, as if the dome contained a pocket of pure void. Then from that impossible blackness a figure emerged. Thomas recognized him instantly from university photographs. Wilson. But no longer the young explorer from the pictures. This Wilson was ancient, his skin drawn tight over bones, eyes milky white but somehow still seeing. His clothes had long since rotted away, replaced by a second skin of something like moss that pulsed with the same blue light as the stones. You came, Wilson said, his voice strange and hollow. I knew someone would follow my notes eventually. Professor Wilson? Thomas stepped forward. What happened to you? What is this place? Wilson's face twisted into what might have been a smile. Not what you think. Not ruins. Not a temple. He gestured at the dome. A seed. Walker backed away, but Thomas moved closer, unable to resist the pull of answers after coming so far. A seed for what? Thomas asked. Wilson extended a hand. Where his fingertips should have been, thin tendrils of blue glowing matter waved gently like sea anemones searching for food. Let me show you. Behind Thomas, Rivera shouted a warning. The machete blade flashed as it swung toward Wilson's outstretched hand. The blade passed through Wilson's arm like it was smoke, but the blue matter clung to the metal, crawling rapidly up toward Rivera's hand. Rivera screamed, dropping the machete, but too late. The blue substance wrapped around his wrist, spreading upward like living vines. He fell to his knees, his screams turning to whimpers, then silence. When he raised his head again, his eyes glowed with the same blue light as Wilson's. Don't fight it, Wilson said, his voice now echoed by Rivera. It doesn't hurt once you accept it. Thomas grabbed Walker's arm and pulled him backward. We need to run, now, but where? The blue light still circled the clearing, and now Thomas could see figures moving among the trees, human shapes walking with the same stiff gait as Luis. Some wore tattered clothing that might have belonged to Wilson's original expedition. Others were nearly naked, their skin overgrown with the glowing moss. There's nowhere to go, Wilson said, almost gently. You came looking for treasure, for knowledge. I'm offering you both, Thomas's mind raced. The journal. There had been something in Wilson's final notes, something about the light's weakness. Fire, Thomas whispered to Walker. Get the fuel from the camp stove. Walker nodded slightly, edging toward their discarded backpacks while Thomas kept Wilson's attention. What is it? Thomas asked, gesturing toward the dome. What species created this? Wilson laughed, a sound like rustling leaves. Species? No, much older than species. This was here before your kind crawled from the oceans. Waiting, dormant until intelligent life evolved enough to understand its gift. The gift of immortality? Thomas remembered the journal's claims. Of unity, Wilson corrected. No more separate minds, no more loneliness. One network spanning the world. It started here thousands of years ago with the first human settlement. They became something new, the first node in the network. But others feared them, buried this place, created warnings in their myths. While Wilson spoke, Walker had reached the backpack. Thomas saw him remove the small fuel canister, his hands shaking. And what happened to that civilization? Thomas asked, playing for time. They're still here. Wilson spread his arms wide. In the trees. In the stones. In the air you breathe. They never died. They just changed form. Walker had the lighter now. Thomas gave him a slight nod. What about you? Thomas took another step toward Wilson. Are you still human? I am more than I was, Wilson said. I remember being afraid at first, watching my body change, but now I understand this is evolution. The next step. And you will join us now, Thomas shouted. Walker flicked the lighter and touched it to the fuel he'd squirted on the ground. Flames erupted between them and Wilson. The blue figures recoiled, their movements suddenly jerky and uncoordinated. Thomas grabbed another backpack in Walker's arm, pulling him toward the narrowest gap between the surrounding figures. The blue lights dimmed where the firelight touched them, creating a temporary path. It fears fire, Thomas said as they ran. That's why they buried it. That's how they contained it. They sprinted through the gap, the heat of the flames at their backs. Behind them, Wilson's voice rose to an inhuman pitch, joined by a chorus of identical cries from the other figures. They ran blindly through the jungle, branches whipping their faces, roots threatening to trip them with each step. The stone path was gone, but Thomas could still feel the pull of the dome behind them, like a physical force tugging at his spine. After what felt like hours, they collapsed beside a small stream, lungs burning, legs shaking. The jungle around them seemed normal again. Birds called, insects buzzed, no blue light pulsed between the leaves. What was that thing? Walker gasped between breaths. Thomas shook his head. Not what I expected. Not ruins. Not treasure. He thought of Wilson's transformed body, of Luis and Esteban now joined to whatever collective awaited in the dome, something that should have stayed buried. Walker looked back the way they had come. Do you think it will follow us? Before Thomas could answer, he noticed something on Walker's arm. A small patch of skin with a faint blue tinge, almost invisible in the daylight. Walker followed his gaze and saw it too, his eyes widening in horror. It touched me, Walker whispered. When we were running, one of those things brushed against me. Thomas stared at the blue patch, watching as it pulsed once, very faintly, in rhythm with his own heartbeat. We need to get back to civilization, Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. Find help. But as they gathered their remaining strength to continue, Thomas felt a strange doubling in his thoughts, as if someone else was thinking alongside him. He raised his hand to rub his tired eyes and froze. On his palm, barely visible, was a small blue spot, the size of a fingerprint where he had touched Wilson's journal, now glowing with the faintest light. Thomas stared at the blue mark on his palm, fighting the urge to claw at his own skin. Beside him, Walker was doing the same, rubbing at the patch on his arm until the skin turned raw. We need to cut it out, Walker said, his voice rising with panic. Before it spreads, Thomas shook his head. Wilson's journal mentioned this. It's not just on the skin. It's already inside us. He closed his eyes, feeling the foreign presence in his mind, a whisper just below the threshold of hearing, a thought that wasn't quite his own. They had been walking for 2 days following the river downstream. Their supplies were nearly gone, and neither had slept more than a few minutes at a time. Every time Thomas closed his eyes, he saw the dome pulsing, felt Wilson's transformed hand reaching for him. The journal, Walker said suddenly. Where is it? Thomas patted his pockets, then froze. The waterproof case containing Wilson's notes was gone, lost somewhere during their frantic escape from the dome. Doesn't matter, Thomas said, though the loss felt crushing. We need to focus on getting back to town. No, you don't understand. Walker grabbed Thomas's shoulder. The journal might have had information about fighting this thing, about people who survived exposure. Thomas pulled away. No one survived. That's why Wilson's expedition never returned. Then why did the university restrict the files? Why not just say they all died from some jungle disease? Walker's eyes were bloodshot, darting constantly to the blue mark on his arm, which had grown to the size of a coin. They must have known something. Thomas had been wondering the same thing. Had someone from the expedition made it back carrying the blue infection with them? Had the university discovered what happened and covered it up? That night, huddled beside a small fire they kept blazing despite the heat, Thomas noticed Walker writing frantically in his pocket notebook. What are you doing? Thomas asked. Documenting everything while I can still remember being myself. Walker didn't look up. The blue spot is growing. And it's not just physical. I can feel it in my head like another set of thoughts running alongside mine. Thomas understood. He had been experiencing the same thing. Moments where he found himself walking in a different direction without consciously deciding to, dreams that felt more like memories of places he'd never been. What does it want? Thomas wondered aloud. Walker finally looked up from his notebook. To connect. That's what Wilson said. It wants to build a network, I think. I think it's trying to connect us to whatever's in that dome. Even from this far away? Walker nodded. I keep feeling this pull like it wants me to go back. Don't you feel it? Thomas did. A constant tugging sensation in his mind, growing stronger when he faced the direction of the dome. Only their exhaustion and dwindling supplies had prevented them from turning around. We need to warn people, Thomas said. If this thing can spread, who would believe us? Walker laughed bitterly. Two crazy men talking about glowing blue infections from an ancient dome? We have proof. Thomas held up his palm, where the blue mark now pulsed visibly. They reached the edge of the small river town the next day, stumbling out of the jungle with torn clothes and wild eyes. The few locals on the dusty main street backed away as they approached. Thomas headed straight for the medical clinic, a small building with peeling white paint. Inside, a young doctor looked up from his desk, alarm crossing his face as they entered. We need help, Thomas said, holding out his hand to show the blue mark, now the size of a golf ball and glowing faintly even in the daylight. The doctor's alarm turned to confusion, then scientific curiosity. He approached cautiously. What is this? An infection? A reaction to a plant? Something in the jungle, Walker said, showing his own mark, which had spread halfway up his forearm. It's spreading. And it's not just physical. The doctor guided them to examination rooms, taking samples from both their marks. Thomas noticed the man's hands shaking slightly as he worked. I've never seen anything like this, the doctor admitted. The tissue appears to be changing at the cellular level. He looked up at Thomas. I need to send these samples to the university in Rio. They have better equipment. No, Thomas and Walker said in unison, their voices overlapping in a way that made the doctor step back. The university covered this up before, Thomas explained, trying to sound rational. We need different help. While the doctor made phone calls, Thomas and Walker waited in the small examination room. Thomas noticed Walker staring blankly at the wall, his fingers tapping a rhythm that matched the pulsing of his blue mark. Walker? Thomas waved a hand before his eyes. Walker blinked, focusing slowly. I can hear them, he whispered. The others, Luis, Esteban, Rivera, even Wilson. They're calling us back. Thomas felt it too, a chorus of voices just below the threshold of hearing, a sense of longing and belonging directed toward the distant dome. The blue patch on his palm throbbed painfully. Fight it, Thomas urged. We need to stay ourselves until we figure this out. Walker nodded, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward the jungle beyond the town. The doctor returned with 2 sets of restraints. I'm sorry, but I need to secure you both, for your safety and others. Help is coming, but it will take time. Thomas didn't argue. Part of him knew the restraints were necessary. The pull to return to the dome was growing stronger by the hour. He held out his wrists. As the doctor secured Walker to his chair, Thomas noticed something disturbing. Where the doctor's fingers had brushed against Walker's blue mark, tiny specks of blue now clung to the doctor's skin. Doctor, Thomas said urgently, you need to wash your hands now and don't touch that material with bare skin. The doctor glanced at his hand, noticing the blue specks. What is this stuff? His voice held the first edge of fear. Before Thomas could answer, the clinic door opened. A woman in a crisp white suit entered, flanked by 2 men in dark clothing that bulged subtly with concealed weapons. Her ID badge bore the university logo. Dr. Chen, she introduced herself. Department of Biological Research. We've been expecting you, Dr. Keller. Thomas stared. How do you know my name? We monitor all research related to the Wilson site, she said matter-of-factly. When Dr. Ramirez here reported your symptoms, we knew immediately what had happened. Walker strained against his restraints. You knew about the dome all along. You knew what was in there. Dr. Chen nodded. Wilson wasn't the first to find it. Just the first to bring back samples. She gestured to their blue marks. The organism has remarkable properties. Regenerative abilities beyond anything in modern medicine. The potential applications are endless. It's not medicine, Thomas said. It's alive, intelligent, it changes people. Yes, unfortunately, that has been the side effect we've struggled to control. She approached, studying the marks with clinical detachment. The organism attempts to establish a hive mind among infected hosts. Previous subjects became unstable. Previous subjects. Walker's voice rose. You've been experimenting with this thing? Dr. Chen ignored the question, turning to the local doctor. You've been exposed, Dr. Ramirez. I'm afraid you'll need to come with us too. The doctor looked down at his hand in horror, the blue specks now visibly moving under his skin. But my patients will be cared for, Chen finished smoothly. Now we need to leave immediately. Containment is our priority. As one of the armed men moved to unlock their restraints, Thomas noticed blue marks on his neck, partially hidden by his collar. Looking closer, Thomas saw that both guards had the same marks, carefully concealed by their clothing. You're infected too, Thomas said, backing away as much as the restraints allowed. Dr. Chen smiled thinly. Not infected, enhanced. Some of us have learned to coexist with the organism, to use its abilities while maintaining our autonomy. You're lying, Walker said. I can feel it trying to connect to something larger. You can't control it. Perhaps not forever, Chen admitted, but long enough to study it, to harness its potential. The regenerative properties alone could revolutionize medicine. The restraints came off. Thomas stood unsteadily, feeling the blue mark pulse in time with his racing heart. And if it spreads beyond your control? He asked. Chen's expression hardened. That's why we need you to come with us. Why we've kept this contained for 30 years. The world isn't ready for this discovery. As they were led from the clinic to a waiting vehicle, Thomas caught Walker's eye. A silent understanding passed between them. Whatever the university knew or thought they knew about the organism, they were wrong. Thomas had felt the ancient intelligence behind it, the patient hunger that had waited centuries for discovery. In the vehicle, as the jungle passed outside the windows, Thomas looked down at his palm. The blue had spread past his wrist now, thin tendrils extending up his forearm like searching fingers. And deep in his mind, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. He wasn't sure how much longer he could fight it. Or if he should. The university's research facility was hidden deep in the rainforest, a sleek compound of white buildings surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. As their vehicle passed through multiple checkpoints, Thomas noticed the guards all wore thick gloves and full-face respirators. They knew the danger of skin contact. Inside, the air felt too cold, too sterile after weeks in the jungle heat. Thomas and Walker were separated immediately, led to different wings of the facility. The last glimpse Thomas had of his companion showed blue veins now creeping up Walker's neck toward his face, his eyes beginning to take on that same unnatural glow that Wilson's had. Thomas was placed in a sealed observation room, white walls and bright lights making his eyes hurt after so long in the dappled shadows of the rainforest. Through a large window, he could see scientists in hazmat suits watching him, taking notes, speaking inaudibly to each other. Dr. Chen's voice came through a speaker. We need to monitor the progression, Dr. Keller. Your rate of transformation seems slower than average. Thomas looked down at his arm. The blue had spread halfway to his elbow now, the skin around it turning translucent, showing strange structures growing beneath. What exactly is this thing? We're not entirely sure, Chen admitted. Our best guess is that it's a symbiotic organism that predates human evolution. The indigenous people of this region had legends about a sleeping god in the forest that could grant eternal life, but at the cost of one's soul. Not far off, Thomas muttered. The organism appears to rewrite human cellular structure while creating a network between infected hosts. A hive mind, essentially. Chen's voice held the detached fascination of someone discussing an interesting lab specimen. Those fully transformed seemed to share consciousness, like Wilson and the others at the dome. Thomas remembered their perfectly synchronized movements, the way multiple voices had spoken through Wilson. And you think you can control this? Through the window, he saw Chen's slight hesitation. We've managed to slow the transformation process, to maintain individual consciousness while accessing some of the organism's benefits. But not forever, Thomas guessed. No, Chen admitted. Eventually, the organism always completes the transformation, but we've extended the partial state to nearly 5 years in some subjects. 5 years. Thomas thought about the blue mark on his palm, the whispers growing louder in his mind. Would he have 5 years of remaining himself before being fully consumed? Days passed in the sterile room. Thomas was subjected to endless tests and observations. Blood draws, tissue samples, cognitive assessments, brain scans. The blue continued to spread, but slower than it had in the jungle. Something in the facility, perhaps the temperature, perhaps treatments they were giving him without his knowledge, was inhibiting the organism. Through his observation window, Thomas occasionally caught glimpses of Walker being wheeled past on a gurney. His transformation was proceeding much faster. The last time Thomas saw him, Walker's skin had turned almost transparent, blue structures replacing what had once been human tissue. On the 7th day, Thomas woke to alarms blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridor outside his room. Through the window, he saw staff running, panic on their faces. No one had come to draw his blood or check his vitals. Hours passed. The alarms eventually stopped, but no one came. Thomas pounded on the window, shouted questions into the empty observation room, but received no response. His door remained locked, the small bathroom and bed the only amenities in his prison. That night, as Thomas drifted in and out of troubled sleep, he heard a tapping on his window. He opened his eyes to see Walker standing on the other side of the glass, except it wasn't really Walker anymore. His body was more blue than human now, his eyes entirely filled with glowing light, strange patterns shifting beneath his translucent skin. Thomas, the thing that had been Walker, said, its voice distorted as if multiple people were speaking at once. "We've come to free you." "We?" Thomas approached the window cautiously. "All of us." Walker's head tilted unnaturally. The others from the jungle. The test subjects. Even some of the researchers who tried to control us. We're all connected now. Thomas felt a chill.
"What happened to Dr. Chen?"
"Joined us," Walker said, his face stretching into an approximation of a smile. "She fought longer than most. Her mind was interesting, full of knowledge about us. She thought they were studying us, but we were studying them too." Thomas backed away from the glass. "What do you want?" "To complete the network. To grow." Walker pressed a blue-veined hand against the window. The organisms in this facility were isolated, kept from communicating with the source. But we found each other anyway. Humans underestimated the range of our connection. "And now?" Thomas asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "Now we return to the dome, to report what we've learned. The seed is ready to flower." Walker, or the collective that now controlled his body, turned to a control panel beside the window. Blue tendrils extended from his fingertips, slipping into the electronic mechanism. The door to Thomas's room slid open with a soft hiss. Thomas didn't move. "I'm not going with you." "You already are part of us," Walker said, gesturing to Thomas's arm, now blue nearly to the shoulder. "You just don't accept it yet." "But you will." Thomas felt the pull in his mind, stronger now, almost overwhelming. The whispers had become voices, dozens of them, speaking in perfect harmony. He recognized some. Walker, Rivera, even Dr. Chen. They called to him, promised understanding beyond anything a human mind could achieve alone. "What happens if I join you?" Thomas asked, fighting to maintain his own thoughts. "What's the endgame here?" Walker's head tilted again, the movement fluid yet wrong. "Evolution. Humanity is inefficient. Billions of separate minds, all alone in their skulls. We offer unity. Purpose. An end to loneliness. By erasing what makes us individuals. By elevating you beyond individuality." Walker stepped aside, gesturing to the open door. "You can come willingly, or the part of us already inside you will bring you anyway. But it's better if you accept it." Thomas knew it was true. The blue organism in his arm pulsed painfully, responding to the proximity of others like it. His thoughts were becoming harder to separate from the voices, his will weakening by the hour. "I need to see it," Thomas said finally. "The dome. I need to understand what this is all about." Walker nodded, seeming pleased. "Yes, understanding is good. The dome contains knowledge from before your species walked upright. Come." Thomas followed Walker through the facility's corridors. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Some security personnel who had tried to fight, researchers who had resisted transformation. Others walked with them in various stages of the blue conversion, moving with the same unsettling coordination. Outside, vehicles waited. No one spoke as they drove back toward the heart of the jungle. No one needed to. Thomas could feel the group consciousness brushing against his mind. A vast ocean of shared thought that made verbal communication seem hopelessly primitive. Days later, They reached the dome again. It had changed, grown larger, the blue light pulsing stronger, the forest around it transformed. Trees glowed with the same light, their branches reaching toward each other like neurons forming connections. The group that had once been individual humans moved as one toward the dome. The crack that Walker had first opened had widened into an archway, the darkness beyond now illuminated by swirling blue patterns. At the threshold, Thomas hesitated. The blue had spread across most of his body now, but his mind was still partly his own, the last fragment of the person he had been fighting against dissolution. What happens to Earth if this spreads? He asked, directing the question at the collective rather than any individual. Through Walker's mouth, the answer came: transformation, unity, the end of nations, wars, divisions. One mind spanning the globe, the next stage for this planet. Thomas thought of the billions of humans living their separate lives, of the chaotic beauty of individual consciousness, of art and music created by minds working alone, of the simple pleasure of private thoughts. And if someone doesn't want this unity? He asked, already knowing the answer. There is no choice, only acceptance or resistance. The outcome is the same. Thomas looked back at the jungle path, the route to human civilization. His legs ached to move toward the dome, the organism in his body pulling him forward. But some part of him, the last shred of Thomas Keller, rebelled. With a sudden burst of will, Thomas turned and ran. He made it 3 steps before his body seized up, his muscles no longer obeying his commands. Slowly, fighting himself the entire way, he turned back toward the dome. The seed must flower, said all the voices together, including his own. It has waited long enough. As Thomas was walked unwillingly toward the threshold, he caught a final glimpse of the sky above the jungle canopy. A plane flew overhead, a reminder of the world beyond. He wondered how long that world would remain human. The blue light from the dome engulfed him as he passed through the archway. For one breathtaking moment, Thomas experienced the full consciousness of the collective, ancient beyond imagining, patient, inhuman, yet somehow beautiful in its unity of purpose. He saw the plan unfolding across decades, the careful placement of spores on Wilson's expedition, the controlled research at the university, the calculated release into the wider world. Then Thomas Keller was gone, dissolved into the greater consciousness that had waited so long beneath the jungle floor. The being that had once been Thomas walked back outside, joining the others who stood in perfect formation around the dome. From the earth, blue tendrils rose like growing plants, reaching skyward. Above, clouds began to glow with the same light, the spores spreading on the wind. The jungle had kept the secret buried for centuries. Now the treasure one man had sought would transform a world. In a research lab thousands of miles away, a scientist opened a sealed container of samples from the Brazilian facility. The blue glow inside pulsed once like a first heartbeat,